All right, welcome to the Podcast Engineering Show. This is our first video episode ever, and I think I'm going to start doing video from now on because I'm actually starting another video project. Anyway, this is the Podcast Engineering Show. Normally, we talk about producing podcast audio at the professional level because I'm an audio engineer from the music business, so we really get deep into audio production and we love it, and how to produce audio, how to fix bad audio, all that stuff. And a lot of the listeners of this show are podcast editors and producers. And so I wanted to do this episode with Evo. I'll introduce him in a second, because this episode is going to be all about how podcasters can receive crypto from their listeners. Cryptocurrency is a big thing. It's up and coming. It's been around for a while. We're going to briefly introduce it, and then we're going to talk about how podcasters can receive crypto from their listeners. The reason I'm doing this on this show, again, mostly we talk about audio production. Here's the deal. As a podcast editor or producer, if you learn how to set up these, you can basically help your clients if you have the technical knowledge of how to set up these systems to receive crypto, you can help your clients do that. So it can actually be a selling point to you. Why should they use you as a podcast editor? Well, because you know how to help them receive crypto and you're familiar with that process. So anyway, this is an introduction. Really, it's an introduction to an introduction, because the whole crypto space is so, not only is it very deep with details and wide with projects, but it's also changing every day. It's still very, very new. So any advice you get today about here's how you do this, step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5, probably in about 3 months, that's literally going to be different. So anyway, so this is an introduction. So let's introduce Evo Terra, one of my great podcasting friends. He is the 40th podcaster ever. This guy is the old school of the old school. Evo Terra, thanks for coming on to the show again, my brother.
Hey, Chris, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me. I can't believe we're going to talk about crypto. I'm one of the dumbest people in the world about crypto, but at least I figured out how to get crypto working with podcasts, so I got that going for me.
That's awesome. And you were on my show previously a while, I don't even know when, probably 3-4 years ago.
Yeah.
And we talked about audio. That was great. So I'll link to that in the show notes as well. But so where are we going to start? We're going to start with this news that you see on the screen right now. This is from yesterday. This is from September 23rd, 2021. Twitter enables tipping with Bitcoin, plans to let users authenticate NFTs. Now, NFTs we're not going to focus on today. That's a whole nother episode series. But Twitter enabling tipping with Bitcoin? Hello, this is huge news. This is like proving just another big thing that's happening, proving that Bitcoin and cryptocurrency are here and they're the future. And again, we're just at the very beginning. You heard this news, Evo?
Yeah, I'm excited about it. You know, I can remember way back in the early days of podcasting when we were all excited about micropayments. And that's exactly what this is. This is Twitter enabling a micro payment so that if you get some value from somebody's tweets, you can just click a little button and toss a little micro payment to them. But we never could do it. I mean, you could always do it, right? You can use PayPal back in the day to do it, as long as you don't mind giving up the vast majority of the transfer. Because when you try and transfer $1 to someone, let's say that's the micropayment that you want to give to someone, you want to send $1 via PayPal, yeah, that person might get 30 cents on the other side, right? It just gets eaten up with all of these fees and stuff. So with normal money, regular money, fiat currency, as the crypto bros will tell you, you can't do that. But that's one of the exciting things about using crypto for these small micropayments is there are still transfer fees. Yeah, you still have to pay some fees, but you're talking about teeny tiny slices of payments. So I'm excited. Now that Twitter's done it, we know that Jack Dorsey is big on the whole Bitcoin crypto world, so it was just a matter of time before this came out. But I certainly hope this propels into the public sphere the idea that there's a way to give value to people you get value from by clicking a button, and ultimately that value is going to be money in one way or another.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about that, how listeners can give crypto to the host through these podcasting apps, through the podcasting 2.0 protocol, you might say. So, but first, let's just cryptocurrency in general. If you're not familiar, cryptocurrency has been around since 2009. It started with Bitcoin. Cryptocurrency is a description of the entire space. And what cryptocurrencies are basically digital tokens that can be used as money, but it's basically digital money if you want to think about it in the easiest sense. It's deeper than that, and there are many different types of cryptocurrencies. There's Bitcoin, Ethereum, Polkadot, Solana. There are thousands. Okay, so today we're just going to be basically talking about Bitcoin, right, Evo? Because Bitcoin, the Lightning Network, is how these micropayments are happening. Correct?
Right.
Okay, so in general, this whole digital currency, cryptocurrency space is taking over, and it's a lot deeper than that. There's these NFTs, which stand for non-fungible tokens. People are selling artwork. People are selling collectibles. The use cases for, let me mention blockchain first. So blockchain is the technology that cryptocurrencies are built upon. So blockchain is a technology, and that technology is allowing all these different use cases, not just cryptocurrencies, but NFTs and others. So, and there's more to it than we can literally get into now. But so you have Bitcoin. Bitcoin is basically the grandfather of all cryptos. It's still the number one crypto as far as market cap. It's the biggest. It's the most popular. It's never been hacked in 12 years ever. Now, satoshis, let's explain
Sure.
satoshis, Evo. You want to do that?
Yeah, so a satoshi is a unit of a Bitcoin. There are 100 million satoshis in one Bitcoin. So while Satoshi is its own cryptocurrency, you can think about it. Really, it's not, as I understand it. It's just a slice of a Bitcoin. So when you get Satoshis, or sats, as we call them, from your listeners, you basically have fractional Bitcoin that you can then do something else with it. So a Satoshi is 100 millionth of a Bitcoin.
Right. And so today, as we're talking, the price of one Bitcoin is around $43,000, let's say.
Yeah, 50,
so
43,
you could tell that,
something crazy. Yeah, it's big.
So like one Satoshi is like fractions of a penny.
Yeah, it's not much.
Yeah. And so you have Bitcoin. And then on top of it, recently, over the past several years, they built the Lightning Network. And the Lightning Network it uses Bitcoin and Satoshis, but it's a network that lays on top of it, and it allows these micropayments, right?
It's the transfer unit, as I like to think about it. I mean, the Bitcoin is the currency, or a Satoshi specifically is the currency, and the Lightning Network is how they move from one person to another person, being transferred back and forth through that. And the good news is, everything Chris is saying is true. None of it's really important to how do you get these Satoshis streamed to you from your listeners.
Right. Thanks for bringing this back, Evo. So just a clarification. The currency is called Bitcoin, and Satoshis are just like a subunit of Bitcoin. So
it's like pennies.
Satoshis
right?
are not. It's not its own coin or anything like that.
Right, exactly. Because I mean, we have U.S. dollars, right? But I can give you 50 cents, and that's 2 quarters. I can give you 10 dimes to make $1. There's a lot of ways you can make $1, and that's what a Satoshi is. Think of it as a penny, except instead of a 1/100th, it's 1/100 millionth of that. So little bitty pico pennies, if you will.
Right. So we are very early in crypto. I want everyone listening and watching to know this. If you don't know much about cryptocurrency, none of us know a lot about crypto. Well, few people know a lot about it, but me and Evo especially, we're new, we're beginners, we're all beginners. This is almost like the internet in 1993, or this is almost like podcasting in 2004. Literally, we are that early. So if you don't quite understand what's happening, if you don't understand the words we're using, you're in the right place. We're all starting here, right, Evo?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and the great news is you don't have to really understand how everything works and is put together. Everything I'm going to share in just a moment about how to actually enable your podcast to receive Satoshis from your listeners requires no knowledge whatsoever of cryptocurrency. It's great.
Well said. So let's get into podcasting 2.0. So here's the funny thing. we all know the Podfather, right? Adam Curry. He basically was the inventor. I don't know, inventor is not the right word, but he was the pioneer of podcasting, and we all sort of acknowledge that. But now he's pioneering podcasting 2.0, right, Evo?
Yeah. It's kind of wild that an MTV VJ was one of the two people that, I'll use the word, that invented podcasting in the summer of 2004, him and Dave Weiner. And now Adam's back, has been back for a year or so, with this Podcasting 2.0 to take podcasting, in his words, to the next level, to do something different with it, kind of bring it back to its roots. But one of the many things he wants to do is extend it, and extending it through Podcasting 2.0 and the podcast namespace, adding in additional tags, if you will, to RSS feeds that enable us to do a lot more, because we really haven't had much innovation around podcast namespace and how RSS feeds can evolve. But Adam popped back into the scene not long ago and said, here's how we're going to do it, and put the infrastructure in place to actually make it happen, including these value for value transfers. It's all based on things that you do in a feed. Right.
So we all know, or you probably should know if you're into podcasting at all, every podcast has a podcast feed, and there's tags in that feed, like the title of the podcast, the description, the title of the episode. The podcast feed encapsulates all that information, but it only had a certain number of tags in it for many years. And now what Adam Curry and Podcasting 2.0 are doing they're adding a lot more tags into that feed information to enable us to do all these other things. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah, that's exactly right. And many hosting companies have decided to follow these new podcast specs, these new Podcast 2.0 namespaces, and are enabling us to do all sorts of things. Like now, every episode of my podcast that I produce, Podcast Pontifications, has a transcript embedded in the RSS feed, in both an HTML version for you to read or as an SRT, which is a subtitle file, which is great, except you can't use that if you are listening to my show on Apple Podcast, because Apple Podcast, the app, doesn't read that particular tag. However, there are a new crop of podcast apps, and you can find them at, oddly enough, newpodcastapps.com, that are taking advantage of these new tags, of these new namespaces, to enable lots of things that we can do, better chapters, transcripts, it's the idea of value for value, there's sound bites, there's funding, there's lots of things you can do now with these new podcast apps if your listeners are listening on one of those apps and you have enabled your podcast through the feed to have these new tags.
Nice. And you can see on the screen, I have a couple examples of these apps. And the second one on the list is Podcast Addict. That's the one I use.
There you go. Yeah, so with Podcast Addict, you can do a lot of things. Now, I don't know that all of the value for value is set up through Podcast Addict, but I know that looking at your list here, Chris, Podfriend, Podverse, and Fountain, those are three that I get most of my satoshis streamed to me from. It's one of those three is the primary way to that listeners can say, yeah, I want to give some value back to this show, either. And the cool thing is they can come back to me as they're listening, so they can set the app up automatically to say, hey, if I'm listening to a podcast, I want that podcaster to get paid. I want to send some value back to them. So I'm going to set up a certain number of satoshis per minute. If I listen to a minute of podcast, I'm going to send, 10 satoshis, 20 satoshis, tiny, tiny, tiny numbers, right? Just as I listen, I want that to happen. That's one way that listeners send money in. They also have the ability to send a boost. There's a big button on all of them that says boost, and you can actually then give additional money. So if I'm listening to a show and they say something that really resonates with me, I can click the boost button and say, here's 1,000 sats, which sounds like a lot, and it's not a lot. Right. It's like 25 cents. And along with that, a little message. And that's the great thing. You can now send a message directly to a podcaster. Think about that, podcasters. Your listeners can now send a message directly to your podcast. Don't have to launch another app. They don't have to find you on Twitter or Instagram or some other weird spot, or even go to your website, which may or may not have comments enabled. They can comment directly to you through this value for value tab, which is wild.
It's so cool. It's like this is the type of innovation and growth and evolution that I've been dreaming about for years in the podcasting space. I mean, I got in 2012 and everything was just the same. And it was like, can't we do more? How can we do more? And so this is
Here's
what we're doing. And I yeah. So also, this is the podcastindex.org website. And this is what Adam has set up for podcasting 2.0, correct?
Yeah, this is kind of the home base for all of the things. So podcastindex.org, podcast 2.0, it all kind of runs through here. And so when you go, you're going to link to newpodcastapps.com. That's just a 301 redirect to the apps listing of all of these. And it shows the apps as well as the podcast hosting companies that have that have enabled various podcasting 2.0 tags.
Right. And so now also current podcasters, they sort of have to claim their podcast on the podcast index. Is that correct?
Well, it's a little wild. So first off, here's the strange things about the podcast index. It is an index, and it lists every single podcast they can find. But if you go to the home page of the podcast index, you'll see a number of podcasts listed. If you scroll down a little bit, and it'll say how many podcasts are in the index. And you'll see that number is over 4 million as of this recording. Now, that's more than listed in the other index we're all familiar with, the one that's purple, right? Apple Podcasts only shows, 2.1, 2.2? So a big difference in that, right? Yeah. And that's because of, there's a lot of reasons why that is. But here's the weird thing about the podcast index. You and I, as normal podcasters, cannot submit shows to the podcast index. They are found, is one way to say that. They work with a variety of podcast hosting companies. You can go to Pod News. If you're like, for example, if your show's not in there, and it probably is, you can search the index. But if it's not there, or if you're launching a brand new show, you just go to that show's listing on Pod News. Sorry, totally blank on the site. You can go to Pod News, and that will then signal to Podcast Index that they need to index this feed. So it's kind of a weird system that goes on. But yeah, see, the Podcast Engineering Show is in there. Lots are. And so once you're there. You're listed. You're ready to go. But if you want to enable value for value funding, so you can get paid, that's when you have to go through the claim my feed process and begin that, which sounds horrible, but I assure you it's not all that bad. It's a little weird, but it's not terrible.
Okay, so should we walk through that now? Overview that now? Or?
Well, let's do the quick overview of it, right? So before we walk through it on the screen, let me just kind of give a basic overview of what's going to happen here. Okay. So as we podcasters know, and we've been talking about for the last 25 minutes, the biggest changes with Podcasting 2.0 and the Podcast Index, I think, are these tags, this new podcast : something. Like when I put a transcript in mine, it shows podcast : transcript is the tag that I use, and that's all. That's a new namespace, which means your hosting company has to do it. So if you're hosted with someplace like, let's just use Anchor, for example. I don't think Anchor does it. Anchor does not enable a process by which you can upload a transcript. So you couldn't use this tag. I'm on Captivate, as who's hosted my content, and they actually do have the ability to upload that tag. So for most of these tags, you have to have that relationship with your hosting company, or like Libsyn is saying, hey, Wild Wild West, man, whatever tags you want to put in is fine by us, just don't screw it up, which is one way to do it, I guess. But the great thing about this new value for value tag is that you don't have to change your RSS feed at all. So even if you are hosted on a platform that does not, like for example, I'm on Captivate.fm, Captivate does not support the value for value tag, but it doesn't matter. Podcast Index will take care of all of that for us. That's one of the other things this site does is it maintains some databases and it handles the transference of this value back and forth from things. So again, you don't need to change your RSS feed to make value for value work so that you can get people streaming satoshis. If you look at my podcast RSS feed right now, you will not see anything about value for value because it's all handled at the Podcast Index.
Got it.
So that's one of the first things to kind of wrap your head around.
Yeah.
Good. So they use a service called Podcast Wallet. So if you go to podcastwallet.com is really how this whole thing begins. And once you go to podcast, is it podcast or podcaster wallet? Try it both ways. I'm not sure which one. I always forget. I think it's Podcast Wallet. Let's see what comes up.
Podcast Wallet.
Nope, Podcaster Wallet. Try that.
There we go.
That's the one. So it's your wallet as a podcaster, right? So here's how it begins. You give it an email address, you give it your RSS feed. Now here's caveat number one. And you should have been doing this all along, podcaster. But this requires you to have access to the email address that's in your RSS feed. So as long as you're using a credible podcast hosting solution like a Libsyn, like a Captivate, a Buzzsprout, any of the other ones, and you purposely set up your RSS feed to have an email address you can deal with, that's what you put in here, because they're going to make sure it's mirrored. Like, for example, I couldn't just drop in your information, Chris, and then start getting the money streamed to me. That would be a very bad thing. So they want to make sure you own this particular feed. But you give it the email address for the feed, you give it the feed URL, and it'll send you a quick email that says, hey, let's make sure you're who you say you are. And if you are, great. Then it sends you to this other system which says, okay, how do you want to get connected? If you know what you're doing, there are basically two paths. If you know what you're doing and you want to set up your own Lightning node, then here's a whole bunch of instructions. Again, if that's only if you really know what you're doing. Most of us do not know what we're doing. Right. So there's another path where you go through a service called satoshis.stream. And satoshis.stream is basically a little node on Lightning that anybody can get to, and we can all use it, and it's what allows the things to transfer back and forth. It's the weird thing about satoshis.stream is you have to register using Telegram, the messenger app. I know. It sounds so bizarre, but you have to register using Telegram. But it is all set up quite nice. Once you do this process of setting up your, registering, then it's basically a follow these things step by step by step. You don't have to enter anything at all into your podcast hosting company itself. It's just automatically set up. And so that if your listeners are using, again, Podfriend, they're using CurioCaster, they're using Fountain, any of the other podcast apps that enable value for value transactions, then people can automatically start streaming to you immediately. There'll even be a little icon that will show up if you value for value enabled your show. It's not hard to do as long as you have access to your RSS feed and you have Telegram installed, and you can follow some straightforward-ish instructions. You'll start getting the money streamed to you right away.
Right. And so when the money so the podcast wallet is actually the crypto wallet where the satoshis end up for you. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. Yeah. And one of the biggest questions people get, or that I get from people, that I had, honestly, is, okay, somebody has just streamed me 20,000 satoshis, which is about $5, whatever, right? I now have that in my wallet. How do I spend that? What do I do with that?
Right.
So you really have two options. You have one option like, hey, take your money and run. And so, again, this requires you to understand how to transfer money from one wallet to another. You can do that if you want to, but I don't recommend it. Not right now. What I recommend you do is what I do. Is I just use those satoshis that are streamed to me to stream to other podcasters. Right. I'm treating these things like tokens. You brought up tokens a minute ago. I'm treating these things like I went to the state fair and I spent $20 to buy a series of tickets. And I can use those tickets to buy beer. I can use those tickets to get a ride. I can use those tickets to go throw darts at balloons that never, ever, ever pop, no matter how many times I hit it. That's what we're doing. We're using these tokens within the ecosystem. And so one of the great things is, yes, if you are very successful and you get hundreds of thousands of satoshis streamed to you, or perhaps 100 million satoshis streamed to you, which is one Bitcoin, and you want to transfer that money out, you can. It's just a wallet. It's just like any other crypto wallet, and it follows the exact same really weird and arcane processes that most normal people don't get. But if you do, it's not that hard to do. But again, you don't have to do that. My recommendation to podcasters is set yourself up, go through these processes of using Satoshi.stream, using Telegram, and just use the funds to send boostograms back and forth to other podcasters who are using it. Let's get used to doing this, and make it normalized, and then more people, I think, will jump on the train. Right,
and then that allows evolution to keep going. It'll just keep getting better and easier and everything.
Right.
And by the way, I want to mention that crypto wallets are very simple things. And if you have your podcaster wallet, you can easily send that Bitcoin, to any other crypto wallet. So
correct.
And that brings up one point is people might say like, well, how do I initially get Bitcoin? And the thing is there, you have to actually sign up for a exchange, what they call it, like a platform. Mm-hmm. In the U.S., the most popular one is Coinbase. And you actually sort of connect your bank account, and then you can actually put in some money. So let's say you put in $100, and then within Coinbase, you can trade your $100 for a bunch of Bitcoin, and then that's how you get Bitcoin. Anyway, like I said, we're not going to go deep into stuff today.
Well, actually, let me jump in. That's one way to get Bitcoin. What we just went through right now is the other way to get Bitcoin. Every time I've ever boosted or streamed to another podcaster through Fountain, which is the or Podfriend, I've used both those apps, it has all been from satoshis that were streamed to me first. I have never funded a wallet. I just put it all out there. I set everything up through Podcaster Wallet, and then I told my fans, my network, hey, I am now accepting cryptocurrency by using these apps. And, I mean, my audience isn't huge. I've got a few hundred people that listen to or read my words, but if 2% of them, that's four or five people know how to do it, they're going to try. They're going to go and say, oh, isn't this cool? Boom, here's 1,000 sats. And so that's how I've collected the whopping, I don't know how many I have right now, maybe 30,000 sats that I've got right now. And that's after me, sharing them with other people. So that's how I've done it, right? But you certainly can go just spend $100 to buy some Bitcoin and then transfer that money into your Fountain account or your CurioCaster account or any of the other accounts in there and spend your money that way. But the way I like to do it is what I did. Let's put it out there and see how many people who've already figured out this crypto stuff, who are smarter than me, can just get some money in, and I'm now suddenly part of the ecosystem.
Exactly. And that's what I mentioned earlier, that podcast editors and producers can help their clients set this up, and then they can just start, receiving Bitcoin.
Exactly.
Whether it's a little or a lot, they can start receiving it. Why not?
Yeah, as long as you have access to the feed and the email address on that feed, you can set it up for your clients. I could go through and set this up for every single one of my clients. Now, I could do it where it funds my own wallet, which would be a dick thing to do, or I could set up individuals for them. But yeah, it's certainly something that can be done. It doesn't require a lot of technical expertise. It just requires some patience and the ability to clearly follow directions, which, understandably, I am not very good at. But if you do follow directions properly, it'll work almost every time.
And now one question that came up when I was talking to my buddy Mike Wilkerson last night, he asked, well, what if a show has two co-hosts? How do they split the money? And I just told him, because you could just send half the sats from the one wallet just to the other person's wallet or something.
Well, you could do that, but the way that this new value for value tag is set up is when you set up your node or when you go to Podcaster Wallet, you can dictate how funds are split. So if I own the show and it's me and a co-host and a producer, maybe I want to give 30% of the money to the co-host, 30% of the money to me, and 40% to the producer. That adds to 100, right? Yes, that does. So I can do that if I want to. You can also say, I needed this. You, the owner of the show, the owner of the feed is in control of how you dictate. That's one of the great things about cryptocurrency. These contracts are set up, and it just simply automatically works that way. So whatever you want to establish, you can establish as the host.
Very interesting. Yeah. So this is a lot, and it's really really exciting. Our buddy Dave Jackson started this show called Leading the Bleeding, which I'll link to in the description. He's Dave. Have you talked to him about going through this process and everything?
Oh yeah. Dave and I were we did a live stream a few months ago, maybe last month, Time's Wonky, right? Where he walked through this he started the show because he couldn't figure it out. And he said, look, if I can't figure it out, nobody can figure it out. And if there's one thing that Dave Jackson is good at is having an idea and starting a podcast on it. So that's what he did for this thing. And then he had this big group call where we all got together, and there were some some of the developers from these apps were in there. There were some hardcore Podcast Index, militant type people that were in there. In fact, even Dave Jones from the Podcast Index showed up to offer some advice. There are people like me and James Cridlin and others, or podcasters who've kind of got on the bandwagon, are trying to, if not evangelize, at least normalize the conversation about this. So it was a lot of fun, and that's what Dave's trying to do with Leading the Bleeding, as he calls it, the intersection of podcasting and Bitcoin, which, doesn't that sound like fun? Dave's taking one for the team and trying to figure all of this stuff out.
I love it. And it's so, I was telling my wife this, Dave Jackson, he really is a pioneer, because he was early in podcasting. He's like, hey, what is this podcasting thing? Let me try it. Let me do it. Now he's doing it again.
Yeah.
And you are too. And so is Adam Curry. I love it.
Yeah, everything old is new again. Here we are in this new space. Weird.
I mean, and the pioneers. Look, we always revere the pioneers, right? Because they're the ones who go out there and bash their face against the wall trying to figure this stuff out. I mean, for instance, back in the day, many people used to code their RSS feeds by hand, right?
I did. Yeah,
you did.
Yeah,
a lot of people did. So now, where we are with this crypto and podcasting, that's sort of like the level we're at, in my opinion, is like we're so early that it's a little weird. Like you said, you got to go to a Telegram group to enable this thing or something. It's a little weird, but that's what it takes to innovate, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really the case, right? And the nice thing about doing it now, as opposed to doing it then, because again, I did that. I hand-coded RSS feeds. I actually hacked my website CMS to fake an enclosure tag in the feed. It was insane, right? I didn't know how to get it to change the actual number of bytes, so I just put in a whole bunch of zeros, and it worked, right? So the weird thing is, it's fairly resilient technology. You're probably... Look, if you hand code an RSS feed today, you're probably going to break it. So don't do that. But there's no need to do it right now. There are 1,000 solutions that will generate an RSS feed for you. And many of those same companies that are making those RSS feeds now are recognizing that, hey, this podcasting 2.0, these namespaces look pretty cool. Let's incorporate a lot of them. But, they can't move as fast as we want them to. So luckily, things like this specifically don't require you to make any changes in there, but it does require you to go through some additional hoops until that smooths itself out. And circling back to the news that you brought up at the beginning of the conversation, Twitter just made this mainstream. The idea to send micropayments to people with Bitcoin, Twitter just made mainstream, which means it will be, if we have this conversation again next year, we won't need to have this conversation next year, because it'll be click button, accepted money, thank you. And it'll show up in your friggin', Bank of America account or whatever, right? It'll be that easy. But we're not there yet, but we will certainly get there.
Right. Right. So by the way, just for everyone listening, I have a lot of resources and links I'm going to put in the show notes here. Dave Jackson actually sent me a bunch of sort of videos of him explaining these things. He might have even sent me that stream you did with him. And also, I'm going to include in the show notes is 4 live streamers that I watch regularly who are talking about crypto. And that's more for the investing side, but it's really good. They cover the news, they cover everything, because I don't think average people understand how much money big financial players are starting to put into cryptocurrency. And so it's just, for me, it helps keep an understanding of the macro of this whole industry and how amazing it really is.
Yeah.
There's also a few other links I'm going to include there. I'll even include a link to Coinbase, and I'll even include a link to my fractal NFTs, which are right here. You can see on the screen now. I actually made a bunch of fractal NFTs. We're not going to get a chance to talk about NFTs today, but these are all limited edition collectible fractals. Anyway, I'm not selling fractals here on this stream, but I just want to let you know that there are exciting things happening in crypto, and it's all blowing up. So Evo, what else should we talk about before we close out?
Oh man, you and I we're not on opposite ends of the spectrum, but we're very different at our experience and exposure to crypto, and our willingness to dig deeper into crypto. Like my willingness to dig deep in crypto is very small. I don't want to go deep, and I know I don't have to go deep because there are other smarter people than me, or at least more interested people than me, that are on the forefront. But the cool thing is, you can go as deep in this as you want, but even if you just want to do it at the super surface level, you really only want to make it easy. Well, not even make it easy, but enable your listeners to give you money through this whole process of value for value. You need to know nothing other than the ability to follow instructions. I just want to bring that back again. It is super simple to do it. You may wonder where your money is. It's a little bit more complicated to figure out how you get it out and do something with it, but not all that much. Just in order to have it set up, pretty stinking simple today, even though there's a lot of steps to start allowing it to happen. And then you can go deeper and figure out all the next cool stuff for when the next wave happens.
Right. That's a great, that's really good to reiterate to folks that these steps it's not rocket science. It's fairly simple, but it is new, and you might be a little uncomfortable going through it. That's not a problem. Just, we have people here to help you. We can connect on Twitter and help each other. It's not difficult, but it will feel weird and new. And I know some people, when things are new and weird, it can seem like it's difficult, but it's not. It's just, you just need to know where to click, and we can all help each other do that. And I know that's what you're doing, Evo.
Yeah.
That's what Dave is doing. Of course, that's what Adam Curry is doing with Podcasting 2.0. So there's a lot of help out there for all of us. Exactly.
So yeah, jump in, podcaster. There's really nothing stopping you from doing it today. And here's the other cool thing. We know this technology will continue to evolve, right? Everything evolves as it goes at a time. But if you set this up right now today through Podcaster Wallet, the chance of that node disappearing on you is pretty slim, because there are so many podcasts. I would say probably something like 90% of all the podcasts that are value for value enabled are using the Podcaster Wallet system because it's all set up. So when and or if that eventually decides to go away, there'll be so much noise made around the podcasting space, and say, hey, now switch over to this. It'll be just as simple. So I don't think anybody wanting to get into it right now is getting in too quickly. A lot of time that's a fear with these things. Right. Like, oh my God, what if it disappears? And I don't think that's likely to happen here. But again, even if it does, there'll be so much noise made about this new transference that I think your chance of losing your 15 cents of real money out of your cryptos is probably pretty slim. So yeah, jump in. Why not?
Yeah, and I would assume even if something changes, like you still have access. I'm sure you would still have access to your wallet, and you could transfer it out, which is really it's simple.
Yeah.
Simple.
Not
so,
hard
all right.
at
So as you could see on the screen, Evo, this is your show, Podcast Pontifications. Everyone, if you're not subscribed, if you don't listen to Evo's show, I mean,
Yeah,
exactly. That we don't even have to say anything. So, Evo, thank you so much again for coming, and let's maybe like in 6 months let's do this again, and I'm sure it'll be a completely different landscape.
Without a doubt, my friend, that day. Thanks, Chris. I appreciate it. Have a great rest of your day, and go podcasting.
Yes. All right. And everybody, thanks for listening, and check out the show notes. There's a bazillion links in there. And also, if you have questions, leave it in the comments on the website, podcastengineeringschool.com. And don't forget, every quarter we run the full program of Podcast Engineering School. So check out the website for that, podcastengineeringschool.com. All right. We'll see y'all later. Thanks, everybody. Bye.